Boundless Authenticity podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness. Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Authenticity podcast. Today, Lynsi Eastburn returns to the show to talk a little more about the Pink Starlights and her work with infertility challenges. If you haven't yet, check out the first episode with Lynsi. Lynsi is a world-renowned pioneer in the field of fertility hypnosis and over 2 decades ago created a program called Keys Hypnofertility to help those struggling with infertility to increase the chance of having healthy babies and help them realize the dream of parenthood. Lynsi is credited with using hypnosis to facilitate pregnancy before anyone else even became aware of the benefits of doing so, and is the author of 3 books on the topic. In the last episode, we discussed topics such as who are the Pink Starlights and what is their purpose, the mission and the message of the Pink Starlights, how Pink Starlights are behind tough fertility battles, Pink Starlights meditations, and we even went into the difference between Pink Starlights, indigo children, rainbow kids, and crystalline kids. And today we're going to talk about channeling, subconscious blocks, energetic alignment, and bridging science and spirituality together to get the job done. You can find Lynsi at hypnofertility.com and on Instagram at lynsi.eastburn. So Lynsi, how's it going?
Hey, it's going really well. How are you doing, Jahan?
I'm doing fantastic in spite of the strange things that have happened for the day.
Oh dear, you're having quite a day, huh?
Yeah. Last thing you expect is a warehouse full of chemicals to explode on you, you know?
Oh my gosh. That's unbelievable almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really out of left field there. Anyways.
But you're safe. Everything around you there, you're safe?
Yeah, I'm safe and nobody got hurt. It's just this one place is still on fire and a lot of people are on high alert about it. But here we are doing a podcast.
And here we are, right? Life goes on, right?
Yep, this is what's important. So I got a copy of Waiting in the Wings from you. It's the second edition. I'm very excited to have it in my hands. I'm going to show it to everybody so they can see.
Awesome.
And I've started flipping through it and rereading the bits. Right now, I'm really interested in the parts at the end where it's the testimonials about the ladies that found you. And they were all, they thought that it was never going to work out for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. That part's really touching because we talked about the last time how it can be really hard for people to deal with. Maybe I'm not gonna have a baby, you know, maybe something's wrong with me and all these kinds of things that people say that are outside of compassion. And in the last episode we also talked about, you know, who the Pink Starlights are, what is their purpose, the mission and the message of the Pink Starlights, how they're behind some of these tough fertility battles. I think we went into the meditations and we talked about the difference between Pink Starlights, indigo children, rainbow, and crystalline kids. But today I want to talk about the channeling aspect of things, the subconscious blocks, and energetic alignment and bridging the science and spirituality together to get the job done.
Okay. And we did talk about a lot in the last interview, didn't we? It just kind of, the babies, the Pink Starlights, they kind of guided everything. I figure I'm at their beck and call. So whatever they want to talk about, we'll go with that.
Yeah. That was such a fascinating conversation. I was talking to my partner and I was like, you can't believe how good that interview was. Here's what we talked about.
That's awesome. It was a great talk. It was really enjoyable for sure. And thanks for having me back on. This is great.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you back on. So let's talk about channeling these babies and more of that kind of stuff to really give people a deeper understanding.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting how that happens. And I don't even consider myself a channel per se, although that's exactly, what goes on. And I remember when I was pregnant with my youngest, who kind of has a lot to do with kicking all of this stuff off or inspiring all this stuff. And I was pregnant with him, and I'd gone to this psychic, and she was doing a reading for me. And then she just stopped and she said, they want to talk directly to you. And I kind of looked around, who? They who? And it was her guide to this group that she was speaking with. And they came through to talk to me directly without her translating, so to speak. But it was really interesting because that was the first time I really experienced that, although I'd read things like Seth and some of those other Ramtha, those other types of, or those other books. And and they told me that I had, that I would be working with love and bringing these babies through. And this baby was going to teach me a lot and then help me to teach others. And so it was really neat because I was sort of sitting there kind of with my chin down to my chest, just really in awe of what had happened. And down the line from there, well, actually, it was before that I started. Sometimes things go on in my brain and it's all sort of happening at the same time. And as we know with the subconscious, we don't have past, present, future in there. So it was before that when I had first moved to Georgia, which I had talked about, and I got into that spiritual group there doing some hypnosis meditation, and we did some automatic writing, which was basically a method of channeling. And that's how I ended up meeting my one particular guide that brought through the 3 keys to conception that ended up eventually becoming the crux to the work that I do. So yes, your question on channeling, it kind of goes all over the place there, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of does. I think it's really interesting that you did write those other 2 books as a result of that, though. I mean, who else is doing this? Who else is really doing this, you know?
Right. No, I leave it to me to come up with something that, you know, there's no template for, right? But yeah, I've just been aware of these babies. I've just been aware. I'm what they would call claircognizant. So you hear about clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. And I would be more of, I mean, we all have those abilities, but I'm more claircognizant. Things just appear in my mind. Answers to questions, information, things that I wasn't thinking anything about. And that, you know, is very similar, if not the same thing as channeling. The information comes to you and comes through that subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind, of course, is, in a sense, it's a doorway or a bridge, or, I mean, it's described many ways, but between us and spirit, or us and the universe, or however you want to, you know, frame that. And yeah, I was always aware of these babies, of these spirit babies, going all the way back to being a kid. But then as the Pink Starlights, you know, sort of took center stage, it started coming through differently. There was just that much more that was directed by them as opposed to me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think that that's really the way that the majority of really great channelers tend to experience it anyway. It's almost like they're not doing anything at all. It's like a phone call to them and they're like, hey, you're going to do this thing whether you're like it or not.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, that's very true. And a lot of people will hear like a voice in their head, and it might be their own voice. It might be, you know, something else, but that's how they recognize it. And for me, it's just the information is there. And if I stop to look at it consciously, you know, or intentionally, it'll be like, okay, that didn't just come out of my data banks, that, you know, that came from somewhere else that I'm working with it, or that it's inspiring me, or that it's igniting my intuition, and just all sorts of ways that you can kind of tune into it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially the part about hearing voices in your head and stuff. Like, I've heard that before. I've heard about things that have happened in my own life, or things that have happened on the global stage. And it's usually just late at night. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm tired, you know, completely worn out from the day. And so I don't have any barriers to anything, you know?
Right.
It's like stuff starts saying things to me. It's like, oh no, go away. I'm not ready for this.
Right. I was literally doing laundry when the Pink Starlights came through with their book. And they're like, okay, here's the book, here's the title, and here's the chapters. And I'm like, I'm doing laundry. Really? I have to go rush and write things down. And they did change some things up for me. But that book just like literally downloaded to me. So that would be pretty, I would say, like a pretty overt example of channeling, but without going into a trance per se, and trying to directly connect, but with having that awareness. And I think that's a lot of claircognizance, is that it's just there. And then you can have the awareness that it's dropped in, or sometimes people just don't notice it, ignore it, dismiss it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I understand that fully. I mean, that's kind of like, for me, when I get a song idea, or let's say I want to talk about something on the podcast that I probably ought not to be talking about. All that stuff, like, people think I really want to talk about certain things. I never do monologues on my show except for once or twice. And it's been like that. Every musical piece I've ever written, it's kind of been like that. I've been doing something else, totally immersed in it, and it's like, here you go. And sometimes I've been like, I don't want to do that though. And there's just this overwhelming thing that kind of taps you on the shoulder energetically, and it's like, but you have to. If you don't, somebody else is going to do it.
Right. It's kind of that resistance is futile thing too, right?
Yeah, because there's been times I've tried not to do things and still ended up doing it anyway. So I guess,
right.
How can other people, especially within the context of fertility, how can other people, besides reading your book and reading the meditations and all that fantastic stuff, how can they just get comfortable with the idea that maybe they have a child that's talking to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I find a lot of people are actually more comfortable with it than they might even realize. And they'll hear something like this interview and they'll say, yeah, that makes sense. I've had this feeling about this baby. I've had this feeling about my children. That's how it really started for me when I started doing the hypnofertility. Was women were coming in and saying, I feel like there's a baby there. And they were, kind of everyday people. I mean, it wasn't like I was working in a particularly metaphysical or spiritual, environment at all. Although it kind of depends where you want to put hypnosis, but you know what I mean? So they would come in and say that. And I'd say, yeah, I believe you. I do feel like there's a baby there. And then we would work from there. I think though, when people are struggling and they're going through something for a long time, and that tends to be the people that I work with, it's preparing them. It's preparing them to be able to accept something like this, or to learn something like this. They need to learn it. This is a big part of the shifts and changes that's happening on the planet right now. And accepting this, I don't even want to call it necessarily the other world, but the world of, you might say, I call it the ethereal world, and then the world of solid, which is where we are and we can poke ourselves in, but there's a strong connection there, if not, an interchangeable, in a sense, way that you could process that. It's just, we're not used to it in our 3-dimensional way of looking at the world. So definitely I wrote the book so people could learn about the Pink Starlights and their particular purpose. And, but yeah, I think people who are drawn to listen to podcasts like this, people who are reading, well, there's a lot. The fertility world especially is very business-like, especially if you get into the Western medicine aspect of it. And there's some books. There's one, I think it's called Infertility is Big Business or something like that. It is a multi-billion-dollar issue globally. And in the United States, it's a good $4 to $5 billion a year. And so you've got a lot of that happening. And when that does tend to happen, it gets out of balance. And so we, without even realizing it, we'll go the other direction to try to pull things in that will help balance that. So I think with people getting so involved with that, Western medicine being left-brained type of thing and trying to make things happen and make sense of things, very left-brained is make sense of things. When that's not happening, it guides us toward, the rest of it, so that we are mind, body, spirit, not just body. And I am not in any way against Western medicine. It's just that it is what it is, and there's a balance that needs to happen.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us, people like yourself, even myself, we are here to kind of tip the scale a little bit, because I get a lot of people that are burned by medicine. I just had a client that survived cancer, and nothing in that medical world did anything for her, and it left her a little bit, I wouldn't use the word psychologically damaged, but frustrated.
Sure.
Frustrated by the whole thing, and it's tough because I see things like this all the time, and I'm sure it's hard for you every single time somebody comes to you and they say, oh, well, in the business of infertility led me in this direction. And now I don't know where to go. We got to keep pushing the message of positivity for people that is what it is, but there's other solutions that you can kind of look at, and hey,
right.
Fertility is one of them.
Right. Well, and hypnofertility started out more of an art and science of hypnosis, and evolved with more and more of the spiritual coming through and more of the divine feminine. And, you can see that things are so out of balance right now. Part of the Pink Starlights purpose is helping us to balance sacred masculine with divine feminine. We've got this, I don't really like the word patriarchy, but we do have, somebody put it to me, a friend of mine, a patriarchal bias. And in the sense of things being really out of balance with the negative aspects of that masculine side, which tends to be aggression, power mongering, war, right? Mars represents the male and is the god of war. And so when we're out of balance, that's what we have going on. And so bringing in the divine feminine, which is not anything against, like I always say this, like man or woman, male or female, boy, girl, any of that type of thing. It's nothing to do with that. It's just that masculine energy, that archetypal energy, the feminine being more maybe intuitive, more open and receptive, more nurturing. And we're needing to blend that together. That's how it should be. That's what we should be. We should have that natural ebb and flow, that natural yin and yang that we've lost over the years.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I see it coming back, though, in a big way. I see it coming back. And it's making a lot of people antsy.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is, because it's big change and we don't like change.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with that, I thought of something. Isn't it just amazing how we have these two concepts, spirituality over here, and then we have hypnosis over here. And very rarely do people recognize that it's one and the same thing. Like if you look at Brian Weiss's work, for example, and you go through some of the examples in his books, you realize that, hypnosis is just a tool, like you said, to bridge the subconscious mind with our rational capacity so that we can see beyond into the real world of things. I tend to consider the unseen world the real world. Yeah. This world that we're in, the fake world. Like we get everything. It's kind of like when your email inbox is full and somebody's trying to send you a message and it gets redirected.
Right.
If you're full of crap, for want of a better word, you can't get the message. And so then you have to go to somebody that's skilled in hypnosis or something like that. And then you begin to get the true essence of what is really supposed to be happening. You get the memo, if you will. So with that, tell me about some of the most common subconscious blocks that people have towards fertility.
So the interesting thing with that is the blocks don't necessarily have to be fertility related. They can be, and sometimes they can be something totally different that actually brings on the same type of feeling. And so the subconscious doesn't want to feel that way. And the fertility issue might bring that feeling on. So the subconscious blocks it. And it could be something, I mean, it could be so many different things. But what I find a lot in the fertility world, as far as blocks go, one of the big ones is mother issues. And again, I feel like that's because we're so out of balance. You know, we have this archetypal mother idea that people really want to have, that mother is nurturing, mother is caring, mother, you know, like the ugly duckling, but mother is going to, no matter what anyone else says, no matter what the world does to you, mother loves you. And that's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily so at all. There's, you know, the mother who eats her young, right? There's women who should not have children and they still do. And so it's where that's happened. Well, our society doesn't like that. We get very uncomfortable with that. Everyone wants to say, you know, people don't like it when people have trauma or they're trying to deal with it. It's something like, oh, that's your mother, that's your dad, that's your brother, things like that. They want to dismiss, and we don't have to take, you know, be abused or traumatized by anyone just because we're related to them. So a lot of times I'll see things like I've had, you know, where the mother was 18 years old. And so too young to have the child herself, and ended up, you know, putting all of her stuff onto this child. So this child is born, has to basically grow up, and then is responsible for, you know, the siblings that come along. Or, you know, mother's out there partying and she's more interested in, you know, the boyfriends, or more interested in anything, or mother's very selfish, or mother brings in boyfriends that cause, you know, a lot of damage, or various things. Even to the point of, sometimes I've had a few women who feel like their mother is actually really great and they're not going to measure up. So the subconscious, being protective, says, well, in order to prevent that from happening, we just won't get pregnant. So instead of saying, well, we will do some therapy and then we won't meet a man like that, or we will, or, you know, a partner like that, we will, you know, we will wait till we're 30 to have a baby so that we're not doing the 18-year-old mom thing. But the subconscious isn't logical. So it'll often just, you know, quick and efficient, like, okay, we won't get pregnant. We won't have that problem. We're done. And it doesn't realize it's causing other issues. It's causing us other issues. And you see that with weight loss, where people will say, well, somebody was, you know, sexually traumatized or sexually abused, and so they gained weight. And that's true. It doesn't mean everyone who's gained weight has that issue, but the subconscious will use that as a protective mechanism. If you're, you know, if you're bigger, thinking that you're bigger, more grown up necessarily, but it's literal, right? Yeah. So it just makes that person bigger, and they can't lose the weight because the subconscious is using it as a protective mechanism. So being able to get through to the subconscious to release that, the person can then have other mechanisms or other ways to take care of themselves without damaging themselves, because excess weight causes a lot of other issues, right? And I use that one a lot as the example because so many people are familiar with it. So then with fertility, same type of thing. You know, the subconscious is being protective, and no matter how much you want a baby, you have to have that subconscious on the same page as the conscious mind, because you can want a baby, plan for a baby, you know, do everything possible to make a baby happen. The subconscious is not on the same page. It's not going to happen.
Love that example. I mean, I've had to talk on other podcasts and give that same example about weight loss. That people come to me for self-sabotage. So it's good to know that you've said it and people can understand that sometimes you just have a little bit of information in there that needs to be changed.
Right. And we can do a lot of work on ourselves, and we can do a lot of work with talk therapy or with Reiki or with other modalities. And we can get ourselves so far. And, you know, there's the tired old onion metaphor about the layers, but it's a great metaphor because we do have all those layers, and we can get through those ourselves. And then sometimes we need help. Hypnosis, I find, is, you know, I call it the missing link, or it's the piece that ties everything together. And so that's what I like so much about it. is anything that you've done, anything that anyone has already done is still of benefit to them. It's still a part of them. Sometimes it's just not enough, or there's not the quite the balanced formula. It's like there is a formula to get to where we need to get to for whatever purpose, but fertility as far as what we're talking to, and to get that baby through. A lot of people know about their babies, and there's readers that will tell people about their babies, and then ultimately they still need to get them here. So hypnosis oftentimes is that last resort. And I was in general practice, before I started with the fertility work. And that's what we would find. Somebody would come in and everything else had failed. And they're kind of like, well, I don't really believe this. I feel kind of hopeless. I'm kind of broke. And, I've done everything else there is. So not like this will work, but I figured I'd give it a try. And then it does. It does, because hypnosis just has so many levels that it can work on.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. This concept it seems to be stigmatized at this moment in time for some reason, where people just don't understand yet that it's all information. Everything that we have floating around in our heads, everything floating around on the outside, it's information. But it can be changed easily. When I say that to people, they kind of go, what? That doesn't make sense. It's like, it's not something that's really meant to be made sense of. It's just is, and there's a lot of people that say, well, I can't be hypnotized and all these kinds of things. But what would you say to somebody like that? I mean...
Well, sure. Yeah, everyone can be hypnotized. You need to want to. No one can make you do anything against your will. So people don't tend to come to see us to pay us to not be hypnotized, right? And, there's just all of these myths about hypnosis, but no one can make you do anything you don't want to do. There's lots of different ways to induce hypnosis. So if someone's tried in the past and not been able, or felt like they're not able to be hypnotized, it's usually going to come down to the skill of the hypnotist rather than the person. And I've heard things. I heard someone after, she had tried to be hypnotized, and the hypnotist told her she couldn't be because of the way she swallowed. And I'm still trying to figure that out to this day. And I hypnotized her. In fact, it was to stop smoking. And so I hypnotized her. She stopped smoking, and, away we went. So it was kind of undoing that type of thing. Usually it is going to be, because hypnosis is not regulated. And so you have some people that are really, really well trained, and some people that aren't, and some people that really get it, and some people that don't. And that's why you see so many definitions of hypnosis out there, and so many misunderstandings, like I say, myths, misconceptions. And, people think you have to be relaxed to be hypnotized. They think you have to quiet your mind, which you don't. They think you can be too smart to be hypnotized. The smarter you are, the better. It's going to work beautifully for you because you know how to do things. You know how to follow instructions. People think they're too controlling, but you're able to take that. Controlling is not a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you get way, way, way out of whack with it. But you can control where you put your energy, where you put your intentions, and again, follow the instructions to be hypnotized. It's participatory. It's not something that's done to a person. So much of it, I think, is in the education or the definition of hypnosis rather than, misconceptions or just things that people have somehow picked up. Like, people will think, well, if you're in hypnosis, you can't hear. And then people will think, well, if you're in hypnosis, they can make you quack like a duck, or quack like a duck, cluck like a chicken, And it's like, well, how would you know to quack like a duck if you can't hear me? Exactly. Right? If you can't hear when you're in hypnosis, how could you hear that you're supposed to quack like a duck? Right. So, and those are some of the things that we hear from time to time, but it is interesting because we get ideas in our heads, and it's like we just sort of absorb information that may not be true and doesn't make sense, but we don't realize it until we look at it and say, oh yeah, how could somebody tell me to do that if I can't hear them?
Yeah. I feel like I've been saying it a lot, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, and you just gotta be aware of what it is you actually want. You can't expect someone to do their job if you're throwing up resistance, you know?
Right. And, you know, the all hypnosis is self-hypnosis is true. And then it's not quite as cut and dried, right? Because we can't always use self-hypnosis to create change, because in self-hypnosis, then we have to also be in charge. And if you're in charge, you can't really allow your hypnotic state to be what it needs to be for some of the deeper work. And, but definitely it is self-hypnosis in that it is that participatory process that just, you know, wanting to do that. And I tell people it's just, simple, but powerful. And all I need you to do is follow my simple instructions. And it's basically to close your eyes and breathe. Okay. That's it. Close your eyes and breathe. Follow my simple instructions. Your mind can wander. You can, you know, wonder about dinner. You can wonder about going on vacation. You can think about your upcoming procedure. You can wonder if you're being hypnotized. It doesn't matter. If you're following my instructions, then you've got this. And that's all it is. And the instructions are not complicated. So it's something like close your eyes, take some deep breaths, let yourself, you know, let go, whatever, those kinds of things. And that's all it really takes is to, you know, go with it, to just really go with that flow of hypnosis. And resistance, again, that comes down to education or explanation. If somebody's afraid, then of course they're going to be resistant. But there's methods to work with that and to help. Sometimes we have to get out of our own way. And sometimes, you know, there's different types of hypnosis inductions that can help bypass a very busy mind. In some cases, that gives people relief. A lot of my clients are you know, self-proclaimed type A, or they're overachievers. They have very fast minds. And hypnosis can give them a little bit of a rest. And they're able to, I mean, your mind can still bing, bing, bing all over the place. And at the same time, we can bypass that and can have some rest, or even it's often called, like, people feel like they're having some relief.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And it's a great segue into the topic of energetic alignment. I mean, what does that mean? Like, are there people who they want to get pregnant or something, and it's just not their time because they're not doing certain things in their lives? What does that mean?
Well, I feel like everything we do or don't do is exactly where we're supposed to be. And so I'll often say things like everything is exact and correct. Just because we don't have a baby and we want a baby doesn't mean we've done anything wrong. This is, we come here, you know, we come here to learn, to teach, to do work. We have purpose for coming to, you know, the earth realm. And it is the difficulties or the obstacles that we face that also cause us to open our eyes or to look into other things. Or sometimes people will close their eyes and bury their head and they won't want to deal with something, but they'll have to, because it will keep coming up. So infertility is a really powerful one, because you've got this biological desire to get pregnant, and you've got this energetic and even this like heartfelt desire to have a baby. So I call it an initiation for people who are really struggling. And it's because they need to learn some things. They need to get to a certain level because of an agreement, you know, that they have with their baby or their babies, that they're going to be part of, you know, I believe we all have agreements. I believe we all, you know, you and I figured out, you know, some time ago when we were not in solid, that we would meet up and do a podcast together. And your podcast was part of that. And the guests that show up and the people that listen, all of that is part of it, if that makes sense. And so when I say like a contract or an agreement,
I was just about to ask you that, if that's like soul contracts. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm familiar with Carolyn Mays, and I am certainly familiar with all of the contracts and whatnot. I don't, it's not really my thing to talk about all the time, but I do believe we have like a contract or an agreement of sorts. And even the person who dropped the door on you in the Starbucks and was rude, you only saw that person for 30 seconds, but that was supposed to happen for whatever reason. or the person is really kind to you. That was supposed to happen. Now, a friend of mine told me this really interesting story just the other day. And he has a little girl. She's 5. It was her birthday. And he's trying to teach her, pay it forward. So they he took her to Starbucks. She wanted to go for her birthday. And she got whatever it was she wanted. And he put $5 down and he told the cashier to use it for the next person's drink. And then there was a couple there, and I guess they heard that it was the girl's birthday. And so they came back and gave the $5 back. And he said, no, I'm trying to teach her that, kind of that pay it forward, that do something for someone else selflessly, or that something came your way. So we want to send something out to the universe or out to others. So he tried to give it back. He had her give it back, and they gave it back again. So he's like, okay, there's definitely a glitch in my opportunity to do this lesson here, and I'm gonna have to rethink this. And it's comical, really. And you can see how it's like all these people were part of this. Even he's trying to teach her something. And these people are needing to learn something. They're not understanding. They're thinking, oh, well, it's her birthday. She should have this $5. And you know what I mean? So it was just really interesting how all of that unfolded. And I would totally think that is an agreement or a contract that we have that was just something that came along for all of us to learn something. And I would guess that couple went home and was thinking, wonder why he wanted her to give away her $5 like that. And I wonder why. And then, because people haven't heard of pay it forward, but Buddha was about pay it forward. And Buddha would say, you're going to plant seeds for trees that you may never sit under and receive the shade from, but you do it anyway. It's part of the way that we ideally are navigating the world.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've heard the soul contracts thing from so many different angles. I've even heard people talking about how they can find these soul contracts through hypnosis. So, I mean...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely so. And you would certainly hear stuff like that with Brian Weiss's work. Yeah. And his work was fascinating. And it was reading Many Lives, Many Masters that really drew me to hypnosis in the first place. And I just thought that was fascinating. And, basically the premise of that book is he's working with a woman who, has all these issues, anxiety and so forth, and they just can't seem to help her. And he says, he's a psychiatrist. He says, well, I learned some hypnosis in medical school. Let me try this. And first try, and she goes back 2,000 years. And he's like, what? And, he's an Ivy League educated, psychiatrist. And he just, goes with this. So that in and of itself can be a contract, because it's like, okay, you're going to go and you're going to get, be in academia and you're going to be successful in this area. But now, because of that placement, you're also going to go this direction. And he has the opportunity to say no or to say yes. And fortunately, he said yes, and he went with it. And he's brought a lot of awareness to the field.
Yeah, the soul contracts thing is so fascinating to me. I mean, I didn't believe it at first until I had some work done by a friend of mine who was trained by Brian Weiss, actually. Oh, wow. Gave me Many Lives, Many Masters to read. And I don't know what she did, but I found out that there was a lot of different contracts I had with various people, including my dad. And anybody that knows my story knows that my dad was a very big instigator, a persecutor in my life. And I think that there's a lot of people that come into your lives and maybe you kind of want to throttle them just to be really, straight to the point. But it's teaching you something. It serves a purpose. And maybe we did say to each other, hey, remember, we agreed you were going to give me shit in this lifetime. And great job, high five.
Good job, Dad. Yeah, I know. It's hard because it's not what you would want. You're like, oh no, I want everyone to be nice to me. I want people to give me money or buy me a swimming pool or whatever. Let me have a pony. And that's not the way this world works. And I really do feel I mean, everybody has their ideas, but I do like the school analogy where we are here to learn, and it's hard to keep track of all the theories and all the possibilities. I always try to stay open to all of them so that whoever's coming in to see me and whoever I'm working with, we just go with that. And I learn things and things come up. Like people will come in and say, I don't believe in past lives, and then promptly drop right into one. And then you'll have people that, I want a past life regression, and they're just not going. And it just depends, where they are. We do have free will. And, there's also, people talk about fate, and I don't know exactly how you would want to define fate, but, to having an openness, having an open-mindedness, having a willingness to explore is a huge, huge part of that. And the infertility journey definitely guides people that way and guides them to explore things they may never have. And whether they're spiritual to start with or not, wherever they're at, if they just had their children, they wouldn't be exploring these various things that they apparently need to explore. And you mentioned the women in the book that wrote their stories. And in the first two books, I included some case studies. And women who had read those books said, I want to write my own story for your next book. And I, of course, said, I'm not writing another book. And they said, yes, you are. And sure enough, there it came. And they said, well, I want to write my story. I want to talk to the people who are where I was, because I never thought this could happen. And there's people in there, I think one had 9 years of infertility and ended up pregnant naturally twice after, I think 3 IVF clinics in different states and so forth, and years and years of treatments. And I know one was, I believe, 11 years of trying to conceive, and she had not been pregnant until, she worked with me. And, for whatever their personal situations were, but they didn't believe it. They really felt like, I know there's a baby there, but I really don't think this is going to happen. And then, wow, this has actually happened. And I know how you feel. And I want you to know that I understand, that I get it, that I know how you feel.
Yeah, that's something that stood out to me. There's a chapter with a girl called Robin, and she says it took them 12 years. And she and her husband both had diagnoses that were saying, something's wrong with you. It's never going to happen. It's, it's like, wow.
Right. And right. And yeah. And she was so enthusiastic and wanting to share her story to help others. And I think that's just huge, because it develops a lot of compassion, empathy, kindness. Maybe we didn't have a lot of that. Maybe we did. Maybe we weren't directing it in certain ways. And then there's this connection between people, I usually have a whole bunch of babies on my wall behind me. Right now, I'm redoing my office and installing. We got part of a library installed here. It's not finished yet, but all those babies, all those babies that are there, and there's hundreds of them, they were thought that they would never come. Their parents were devastated, were frustrated, were maybe feeling hopeless and really wondering if they would ever come. And they did. And so that's fertility, but it's also life. That maybe if something's not happening on your time frame, it doesn't mean it's not happening.
I agree with you on that one. So the final topic is bridging science and spirituality together to get the job done. What can you say about that? Right.
Yeah, I do like that. I kind of walk both worlds. I am left-brained myself, and then here I am with all of these, babies pouring into my head and all of that. And science can be very rigid itself. And then people, on the other hand, can get into either the holistic area or the metaphysical or spiritual area, and then they become anti, science. And we really need both. Science or the medical world tends to like absolutes, but there aren't any. And, who's to say that the medical assistance that we have wasn't sent as part of our spiritual journey that we have access to these things. It's when they get out of balance, like anything with the person you're mentioning with the cancer. I'm going to guess that she was, or I'm going to say she was in an area that was very rigid, very absolute focused, and wasn't listening to her. Now you see the reproductive clinics having holistic modalities available, even having little health fairs, having, referrals to folks that do, acupuncture, nutrition, yoga, hypnosis, whatever it is. And then also on our side, we need to, like, I know of different clinics, and I know when someone's had a bad experience with a clinic, who I can send them to that is going to be more receptive. I've had REs say to people, well, yeah, if you want to waste your money, you can do any of that stuff. It's not going to help. And that's like anything that is not, straight up Western medicine. And then at the same time, there's some awesome REs out there that are very spiritual or very open to help to include everything. And it's the same with, you can, there are things that Western medicine can help with. For example, if you break your arm, it doesn't matter how many needles you put in that arm and how much nutrition you give to that arm and how many oils you sniff, that arm is not going to get fixed. You do need some help that's going to set it, that's going to fix it, make sure that it heals properly, right? So the same type of thing. Sometimes women might have fallopian tube blockages. They might have a lot of fibroids going on in the uterus. They might have something that, and maybe in some ways we could visualize that out of the picture. Maybe there's some things that we could do, but maybe at the same time, we also need to have the tubes unblocked, or we need to have the fibroids removed. Endometriosis, if it's growing on the inside, it's growing on the outside, it's growing on the other organs. Sometimes that's going to require, I don't like anything to be just written off. And, my grandson was born, I don't know if I had him yet when I last talked to you, but he was born October 8th. And a couple of weeks ago, he started vomiting, projectile vomiting. And he was about probably 3 weeks old or so. Yeah, just about between 3 and 4 weeks old. And, so at first it was like, well, maybe he just doesn't feel well. It's got an upset tummy. That happens. And he didn't have a fever. He wasn't upset. He would just, but all of a sudden he would just have his bottle and then throw it all back up. And so, I was there with him and with my son and daughter-in-law. And, he seemed to be fine. But I said, if he's still doing this tomorrow, you should get him to the doctor, just to make sure. And that's what they did. They took him to the pediatrician, who gave them formula that they figured was like anti-allergen. And then he came home and he threw that all up too. And my son and daughter-in-law just said, you know what, this doesn't feel right. We're taking him to Children's. And they went to Children's, and he actually had a condition where the muscle, I guess there between the stomach and the small intestine, was too big. And they had to surgically alter it. And that little baby did have to have surgery, but he's just thriving now. He's eating. Now, if we would have been anti-Western medicine, then you could have given him every treatment under the sun, and it would not have helped and would have harmed. So I like to say that because I like the balance between the two. And we're hearing, because everything's so divisive right now, and everybody's so divided, that we're really getting into this extremism. And that's at the same time what the Pink Starlights are coming through to help break down, to balance sacred masculine and divine feminine, which also goes into the whole science and spirit, right? The whole medical aspect. And that surgeon saved that baby's life, saved my grandson's life. So keeping that in mind too, that's my idea of balancing science and spirit. So we get the benefit of all of it, and we're helping each side open up. and be more receptive.
I agree with you on that. There's too much random stuff out there that people are putting out there. And also there's this notion that everything scientific is bad. And I can definitely validate people who say, oh, well, a lot of the science on certain things is bought and paid for. Sure. But that's not all of science. So it's not every scientist. It's not all science. It's about observation at the end of the day. And real science is about observing a phenomenon. Once your observation changes, then the conclusion changes and we get better. And people aren't giving themselves enough space to really step back and see everything that's happening all at once and try to choose what you want to contribute to. That's a big bone I got to pick with a lot of what's happening out there right now is,
Yeah.
So I won't talk about that too much. That's not the right platform.
No, but you're right. And, a lot of it's just become, it's pop culture in a sense, right? Like you hear words like bipolar and you hear words like psycho, and you hear certain words that are just out there that really don't mean what they mean clinically or medically speaking. And you hear people talking about, well, this study proved. Well, studies don't prove. They do not prove. They indicate. They indicate. And what do you see in most studies? Further research would be indicated, it would appear that, it seems that, it looks like, but people go out there saying that studies prove, but they don't.
That's the
and that's huge damage.
To push this stuff, and people are so, I guess, ready to have an expert tell them that this thing was exactly this way, that they don't factor any of that in at all,
Right. Yeah. People, and this was what I found in the balance of science and spirit with my son and his partner, was they didn't feel like it was right. They felt like something was wrong, and they were tuned into that. And I told her too, she asked me, how do you know when they're really sick or how you're freaking out? 'Cause she's a new mom. And I said, you'll know. You will absolutely know. And she's like, wow, I did know. Yeah. If you're not terrified, and part of the issues we have right now is people are terrifying everybody else and making everybody the bad guy. If she were frightened of Western medicine or frightened of whatever else it might be, she might not have gone, even though her gut was telling her to do it.
Yep. For sure.
So if we can get our intuition, if we can be tuned into our intuition, and we cannot make anything, science or spirit, the bad thing, because, you see science and they're ridiculing spirit, or they're ridiculing anything, holistic or natural. And then on the other side, you've got them ridiculing or, judging science. Like, for example, if somebody's going to say, well, I know it's okay to take it. It's natural. Well, so is arsenic. That's the plan. You can take it and it's natural, but so we get these sweeping statements and we have to balance them more. So that, I think, it's really my huge emphasis on balancing science and spirit, just being really aware and connected.
I hear you. And it's interesting because why would real science want to make fun of spirituality? Why would the creative force make you become a scientist to ridicule yourself? Because that's essentially what it is, It's such a strange phenomenon.
It's human, though. It's human, right? Because all the other species don't do that. It's the human thing, and it's us being out of balance in our egos. Some of us, it's a wonder we can hold our heads up, and so then and we grew the frontal lobes, and we think that because we can think that we know everything, and we're terrible at thinking logical. My big thing is circular thinking, right? Where you decide your answer. So I want this answer, and therefore this is how I get there. Circular thinking. You end up with your answer, proving it with your answer, which you can't do. You're not allowed to do that. That doesn't count. That's not critical thinking, right? And so that's a big thing, that if we let ourselves function as we needed to, or are more or less designed to, And this is the big thing. This is where the Pink Starlights are coming through. And this whole energetic shift, this whole spiritual shift is, hey, let's use all that we are in a way that is beneficial, right? That's going to be helpful to everyone. It doesn't mean life's going to be perfect, but it means that there's just going to be so much less of this awful negativity, judgment, divisiveness, anger. I mean, really out there, anger, like some severe anger stuff going on right now. And instead, in the us versus them and science versus spirit, whatever it is, us versus them, that's what's really harming everyone. And you're seeing that in the fertility world, us versus them, Western versus, Eastern or holistic or, whatever you want to call that. And it's not a matter of either or. It's a matter of or. It's a matter of possibly either, possibly both, and being able to be intuitive enough to decide for yourself.
I hear you on that 100%. I am very outspoken about guarding your consciousness from outside influences. If it means don't watch TV and don't listen to the news and don't get involved in the latest peer-reviewed studies and things like that, because those things are managing your perceptions for you, and then it subtracts from your true free will. And I have a problem with that. And I mean, you talked about soul contracts. I found out that was a part of one of my missions on this earth. And I was very unreluctant when the person told me, that's something you came here to do, to raise a whole hornet's nest about this thing and to help people. I think what she said to me specifically when I was working with her was, for the next 4 to 6 years, you're going to have to talk about things you don't want to talk about. They're going to be uncomfortable for you to talk about. And it's a lot to do with how people's free will is being taken from them by outside forces. And it's like, at first I was resistant because I was like, I don't want to make it sound like everybody's a victim to this thing that's happening. And then it just became clear to me through spirit that there's no other way, because that's the only way that people understand certain things. Through this polarized thinking. I'm like, no.
Right. And frustratingly, right, even the stuff that you're trying to bring to the forefront, people take it and run with it to support one side or another. And it shouldn't be a side thing. That's why I said to the babies, you make me write a book and then you make me include religion and politics in it. And this was prior to when the book was downloaded to me. This was prior to the Trump election. And the way that I talk about it in the book is not to say either side. It's not an either or, unless you read it that way. Like if somebody feels one way or the other, then they'll read it that way. But it isn't that way. It's an example to show how people are not thinking critically and how they're making. They're using those, you've talked about that with the NLP or the sound bites, right? And they're using memes. Memes are their proof. And, it doesn't matter if just because somebody's an idiot or somebody else said they're an idiot, that doesn't mean that they're not good for something or that they're bad for something. And just because somebody is, called a name, that's not, you can't use that. I mean, you can, but it's not authentic in using that to make a choice. Like you need to make your choices based on actual information, things like that. So they made me put that in there just because, the United States kind of thinks it's the world. We're known that way. Everywhere else is like, the Americans, like they think they're it, and they do, because I have to laugh. Biden's in so much trouble for inflation, and yet inflation is everywhere in the world, and is it Biden's fault in the entire world, right? That's not taking a political side statement, only an example of, this doesn't fit, right? Your thinking isn't, that person's thinking isn't critical or isn't logical because of that. You know what I mean? And so I said to the babies, I'm like, come on, guys. And then religion, the same type of thing with people, following things that aren't good, aren't healthy, are dangerous, and just dismissing it or doing it convincing themselves that it's that kind of thing. And I know you've talked about both of those things yourself. And it's not to, I'm like, oh, great. That's what they tell you. Never talk religion and politics. Okay. Thank you, Pink Starlights. But I'm not talking it to argue any one side or anything. What I am using it for is to talk about, spirituality, intuition, critical thinking, and what about all the compassion that we should be having, and the understanding and the desire to learn and to incorporate everything that's in our world instead of just, do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Like, seek first to understand and just make it all about doing that one thing. Because even when you have all the facts, what I found is like, you can go down the deepest rabbit hole, you can do the best research, and you still don't know jack shit. No, you still don't.
That's true.
Even as a professional in your industry, how many years have you been doing this? You still have these moments where you're like, I don't even know if I know
right.
what I'm talking about. Like, things can change at any time and things can expand, and there's something you didn't know. And I just got a big bone to pick with people who are trying to strip others of their free will. It's crazy because it's like you said, somebody can read your book and they will take it literally. Lynsi said it, it must be true. It's an absolute fact. Somebody listens to my podcast and they hear what we talk about. Well, Jahan and Lynsi were talking about this thing, and that's the absolute fact. That's all there is to it. I'm the expert now. And
right. Right.
So
or we're, the dumbasses, because a friend of mine, she said to me, I thought you were, I commented on something that she said. And it wasn't in a one side or another way. It was to point out that the logic didn't fit. And she said, I thought you were better and smarter than that. And I said, well, I don't think I'm better than anybody. But when the smarter part comes into play, the problem with that is that I can see this stuff, and I can see the narrative that you need to make everything okay for you. And I can see the narratives that other people need to make everything okay for them, which, ends up being an attack on me for not being better or smarter. But that's not it at all. So all of us, there's lots of smart people that think completely different things and opposing thoughts. And it doesn't mean any of them aren't smart.
Yeah.
It's, interpretation. It's where they are. So, yeah, I totally get where you're at with all that you're talking about out there.
Beliefs are crazy things.
Yeah. And, I've heard the definition of wisdom being that you don't think you know anything. And I think there's really something to that. Because even when I talk, people want to, let's talk about past lives or let's talk about contracts. And I'm like, well, I don't know for sure that any of that is a thing. I don't know that it isn't. And then we can only deal with so many things in our own world. So I need to kind of go the direction that I can. That's, but I'm open to everybody else's, whatever else they might think or be experiencing. And I think that's the way I can best help people, is I can support them from wherever they're at.
I hear you. Someone said to me the other day, they don't believe in soul contracts and signing up for certain things because they're like, why on earth would I sign up for this? And it's like, on the other side of that question is, why on earth would you not sign up for this? Like, what's the alternative to that? And I often find myself very conflicted with that, because I'll see something horrible that happened in someone's life and I'm like, man, I'm not so sure they signed up for that. Is that something they signed up for? Is that something that was engineered, working against them, that they just had no choice in the matter? I have no clue. But then there's these moments in my own spiritual work over the years where I've seen evidence that these contracts exist. I've seen references internally in my intuition and all these things where it's like, I dreamt that and I saw this happening and it still happened. Or I know deep down that this is something that carried over from a past life or whatever. And so it's like, you just throw your hands up and you gotta surrender. You don't have a choice.
That's it right there, is surrender. It's absolutely that. It's surrender.
Yeah. So is there anything that the Pink Starlights themselves would like to say?
Well, I think they really appreciate you having us here, and they really like the direction that this conversation went. And I think the great thing is being able, because we can be open and just sort of let things flow, we can have a really good conversation and hopefully get people thinking, or even just get outside of, even just to look at the way that they're thinking. And that's a hypnosis in and of itself, right? Is bypassing a way that we're thinking so that we can open up to maybe see things differently, or make shifts or changes, or, just have some kind of an awareness. So, yeah, it is for me fascinating to talk about the Pink Starlights, because like I say, I'm learning about them all the time too. And they'll come up with things they decide that should be said. The direction that we just went was kind of interesting, because it did go a bit around and outside of fertility, although still, you could still see the connection, right? So, but yeah, I did put some meditations that you mentioned in the book to help people to align. And you mentioned aligning energy. And I did sort of mention that just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. And so that's really what I consider that energetic alignment is. You can almost put it back to soul contracts. Like, what am I supposed to be doing, and how am I aligning with that?
Fantastic. Lynsi, thanks for being on the Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Thank you, Jahan, for having me. I just appreciate that so much. Thank you.
I appreciate you.